Hi everybody, this is Noelle from Petitti Gardens and Petitti Garden Centers, sorry. And today we are doing a spotlight on Amaryllis. And it is holiday time, don't get me wrong, and we're getting those Amaryllis going and blooming. And so there's a couple different steps that we need to go through. But as usual with spotlights, I want to talk to you about all the basic needs that Amaryllis do need to grow well for you. So start out with Amaryllis they're a true bulb. They're a relative of a daffodil, snowdrops, onions. So they are readily available out there, usually just around the same time that you see a lot of your spring blooming bulbs coming out in the fall in the garden center and closer to the holiday where you'll see them come out in full stock. I will have to start out with, they are not hardy to northeastern Ohio, just so you know. So they're more like zone 9 and 10, which is actually 20 degrees to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So they will not survive the winters around here. If you live in a little bit warmer climate, might do fine outside for you year round. But with these, I want to tell you, light that they do prefer is anywhere from a bright indirect light all the way to a part shade. So part shade is usually 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight, all the way to that bright indirect lighting. So bright indirect lighting, we talk about northern exposure right up against the window. If it's an eastern exposure or a western exposure or even a southern exposure, we want you to move that plant a little bit away from the window or diffuse that sunlight that's coming in through the window, okay? They don't need that bright beating down sunlight on them. Next thing is watering. So with Amaryllis, the only time that you actually water them thoroughly, that we normally talk about thoroughly deep watering, is when you're trying to rehydrate them. So the first time you plant a bulb, if you received a bulb as a gift or you're planting them so they start blooming for the holidays, you actually need to kind of rehydrate that root system. And so you're going to plant them and then you are going to thoroughly water the soil substrate that you plant them in. Make sure that it is completely moistened so that root system can really start absorbing water and of course put it into the bulb plant. The bulb, don't get me wrong, has a lot of water in it and of course everything it needs to grow and bloom for you. They've already been pre-forced by the growers of Amaryllis bulbs. So needless to say, that water and rehydrating just happens when you start them out again. After that, you want to keep the bulbs on the drier side of watering. The reason being is if you keep that bulb constantly wet, even if it's an even moisture and just slightly dry, just check around your bulb because you want that bulb to stay nice and firm. You don't want anything rotting, any soft areas, anything like that. So again, on the drier side of watering. And a couple other growers that I've seen on YouTube and things, they actually recommend about a 1/4 cup of water 1 time per week. Again, that kind of depends on your indoor environment. So just keep that in mind. The 1/4 cup of water, okay, but really on the drier side of watering is going to be best overall, okay? Let's talk about temperature in the home. So average household temperatures, slightly cooler would be better. When you are planting a bulb for the first time, they can tolerate a little bit more warmth because that will start to wake that bulb up and get that bulb to really start to bloom for you. But once it gets to be about 2 to 3 inches tall, you actually want to keep it in a cooler environment. So I'm going to always say about 60 degrees to 70 degrees for your average growing temperature for these. Once they get to bloom stage, bud and bloom stage, you really want to keep them on the cooler side. So 60, 55 even 50 degrees. That will keep your flowering and your budding much longer for you, okay? So it's just like any bulb. You get them a little bit warmer or too warm, they're really gonna stretch up and grow very, very quickly. They're gonna go into bud and bloom very quickly, and then they're gonna bloom out quickly the warmer you keep them. So that's why with Amaryllis, try to keep them on the cooler side as far as temperatures are concerned. Humidity is not a big thing with these bulbs. Yes, it's good to be in a humid environment, but again, average humidity, a little bit drier sometimes in the home is okay for them. They'll still go ahead and do what they're supposed to do because again, they've been pre-forced by those wholesale growers and they're just ready to pop out. So that's a really good thing. Okay. Fertilizer. So when you have an Amaryllis in the fall that you have purchased or you're planning on planting, guess what? Does not need any fertilizer at that time. As I said, they're ready to go. They've already been pre-forced, pre-cooled, I should say. And so they're ready. Now, when you do want to feed them is actually during the growing season. So that kind of April through September time period, we use things like bulb tone. So slow release bulb food is really great for them. And you would just apply it typically about once a month with bulb tone. And you'd go ahead and use that through the growing season. Just follow the package directions, okay? You can also use a multi-purpose liquid fertilizer if you prefer using that too. Again, just follow the directions, okay? Now, with these plants, maintenance-wise, with most of your bulbs that you force, you want to make sure that you are turning them every day, every other day, because bulbs will always grow towards the light source, okay? So make sure that, so you don't want your bulbs to be crooked, just make sure that you are turning that pot, maybe a half turn or a quarter turn every day, and then get them to kind of grow back straight for you, okay? So turning's pretty important. The other thing with the bulbs that I would say maintenance-wise is just after the flowers are done blooming, go ahead and deadhead. The reason being is you don't want the Amaryllis bulbs to put energy towards forming seeds. And they will form seeds because you can see here, this Amaryllis has really large pollen sacs on the anthers, and there's a long pistil, and they do pollinate, and then of course will start to develop seeds. You don't want that to happen. So there's a couple things you can do here. You can remove the pollen sacs, just simply pinch them off, okay? And that will actually prolong your blooming. We talk about that when we're growing lilies, like Easter lilies or even Asiatic Oriental lilies. If you remove those pollen sacs, you're gonna get the flower to last much longer for you, and it won't fertilize and then go to seed, okay? So that's always a good thing to do. And then the other thing is go ahead and just simply, when this flower is done, and it's really just opening, so I don't wanna deadhead it just yet, but you would simply cut or just kind of pinch and snap the flower off at its base and let the other flower buds continue to fill out and grow, okay? But do deadhead Amaryllis. It really does help in the long run as far as that plant, filling out and blooming. The other thing with Amaryllis is they produce very long strap-like leaves. And a lot of people say, well, can I cut those leaves off? No, not at all. You want the Amaryllis leaves to grow and be healthy for as long as possible. The reason being is those leaves are working towards another flower development, another flowering stalk or scape development. So on average, you need at least 4 leaves to be produced with the Amaryllis in order to produce one flowering stalk, believe it or not. So as you're growing the Amaryllis through the seasons, and I'll talk about that in just a bit, you want to make sure that those leaves continue to look green and healthy, continue to grow and be long so that they can absorb all of that sun energy, produce that chlorophyll, really work on producing food for that bulb and that new bloom to come up, okay? Now, potting wise, okay? With Amaryllis, you want to start out like all bulbs. You want to make sure that the bulb is firm, doesn't have any bruises or any soft spots. It should have a tunic on it, which is that little brown, that papery substance that's on the outside. That's okay. That's a protective layer on the outside of the bulb. So that tunic is in place as well. And we'll show you a video here where you have different size bulbs. And so bulb growers, what they do is they'll grow these bulbs, these Amaryllis bulbs, for 3 to 5 years typically at their growing facilities and on their farms. And then that determines how big the bulb is when you go and receive it and purchase it. And so what happens is the smaller bulbs are going to produce usually a lesser amount of bloomscapes. The larger bulbs, which are going to be more expensive, again, because they've been growing for several years at this facility, are going to produce more scapes for you and typically will be larger for you. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between the bulb sizes. You'll see them in all different sizes. The other thing that you need to know is Amaryllis bulbs are typically grown in South America and then also in Holland. And so what happens with those growers is if you happen to see that your bulb has come from South America, it will usually produce flowers within about 4 to 6 weeks, okay? If it's grown in Holland, it will usually take a little bit longer time, 6 to 8 weeks, to develop blooms, okay? So just be aware, look at your packaging, see if it's come from either place, and then you'll know it won't take as long for it to force if it's come from South America, okay? So keep that in mind. Potting this up, what we did is we made sure that the bulb, Amaryllis bulbs really like to be snug in their containers, okay? So if they're root bound, that's actually okay for them. But when you're first planting it up, we found a container that gave it about 1 inch of space all the way around the bulb, okay? The next thing that we did is we filled the container pretty high, and I should have said, we normally like to plant them in containers that have good drainage. You want to, again, make sure that they're never sitting in water, that water is continually draining out, right? So needless to say, in this pot, we wanted to fill it with potting soil to bring that bulb up so it's more visible at the top lip of the pot, okay? Then the next thing we did is we just made a hole in the center, made sure that the root system was snuggled down into the soil. And then we actually, with planting Amaryllis, you want them to have the neck and also the shoulders, the top of that bulb, to be exposed, okay? Because we don't want any rotting, any wet soil, anything around them, okay, to make them soft. So make sure, and I usually say you need at least 1/3 of the top of that Amaryllis bulb to show, but I kind of do half of the bulb out and exposed, half of the bulb in the soil, probably even a little bit less because I like the way that the bulbs look, okay? So make sure that you are exposing the neck and the shoulders of the Amaryllis bulb and really patting down the soil or tapping down the soil around them. Reason being is once they get flowering, they can get really top heavy. So some of those varieties produce so many flowers and buds and stalks that they can have that wiggle. So make sure that you're really tamping down that soil so it's nice and firm. And if you do need to put a stake in there to support the Amaryllis, that's fine too, no problem. I love using branches like willow branches or winterberry or something of that nature that you can put around the grown Amaryllis, the flowering Amaryllis, to help them not tip over. Okay, so keep that in mind. The last thing is I just put some deer moss around the top, just some decorative moss. And what this does is it literally is a decorative function. The soil doesn't need to stay moist. I like using deer moss because you don't have to moisten it to kind of rehydrate it. It's colorful, it's pretty. Go ahead and just use it as a decorative top layer. You can use pebbles. You can use anything that you have on hand. Now, let's talk about what the biggest question. Oh, Taylor, I forgot to show everybody. This is what not to do when you're potting your Amaryllis. This was one of the Amaryllis that came in a package, like you see in a box. It has the pot, it has the soil, it has the bulb, the dry bulb. Well, look at how this was potted up. The soil level is all the way up to the neck, okay, the top of the neck. So every time this plant is watered, the water is likely to move into that neck. You don't want that to happen, okay? You want to make sure that you're just watering the soil substrate, never watering the bulb. So this Amaryllis really needs to be lifted and brought up so the neck and the shoulders are exposed. It's doing great. It's lovely. It already has 2 bloomscapes here. It's got some leaves coming out. It looks like there's 4 leaves right here. So it's working on developing other bloomscapes. But again, just make sure that you're bringing up these bulbs so that neck and shoulders are exposed, okay? Now, this is the key. And everyone, we get so many callers, so many questions about how do I get my Amaryllis to rebloom? There's actually 2 ways that you can do this. One is pretty easy. The other, you got to do a little bit more maintenance, okay? So the first way that I'm going to tell you is just treat the Amaryllis like a houseplant year round. Keep it in that bright indirect light to part sun. Go ahead and water it, but again, keep it kind of on the drier side, after planting, and then go ahead and fertilize it through the growing season, okay? If you do those things and keep it as a house plant, it will naturally rebloom for you come spring, okay? So they naturally bloom at that time of year. You really should not have a problem. Angelo Petitti discovered this a few years ago, and ever since then, that's how he grows his Amaryllis, okay? And we've had very, very good success with that. And you can repot them, you can arrange them together, you can put several bulbs together. They produce offshoots. You can remove the offshoots, repot those, and it works out really, really well. So that's kind of the easy way to get them to rebloom. If you want to, and this is kind of the older way to do this, and it's a fine way to do it. Some people have trouble with it, some people don't. But it's when you put your bulb into a dormant state. So again, after you plant your bulb, let's say you planted it during this holiday season. This bulb is going to grow, it's going to bloom. The blooms, of course, are going to fade. You can cut the bloom stalk right above the neck when everything fades. Leave the leaves, okay, as they develop and grow. You can treat this as a house plant until mid to end of May here in northeastern Ohio, because that's when our last spring frost is, okay? You can take it outside at that time of year. And again, part shaded area, bright indirect light on the northern side, great, okay? And you can grow it outside all season. Just watch, you don't want it to be inundated with water. So it's a nice plant to put out on the patio table if you have an umbrella that kind of shields it from the rainfall and so forth, okay? Now, take care of it, fertilize it all season, outdoors, or again, you could keep it indoors if you wanted to. And then right around the end of August, beginning of September, you're going to want to bring it inside if it's outside, or bring it into a dark, cool place, okay? The leaves might be still growing, not a big deal. You're going to take the pot and all, and you're going to put it in that dark, cool place. And I'm talking 50 degrees, 55 degrees, 60 degrees will probably work. So cool basement or cellar, pantry, something like that, okay? We're going to expose it to that cool temperature and the darkness for 2 months. It's got to be at least 2 months, okay, in order to kind of re-trigger this blooming. Then after 2 months, so if we started in September, we're going to bring it back in the house in November, okay? Again, expose it to a little bit warmer temperatures, thoroughly water the soil substrate, go ahead and expose it to more light, and you will start to see that plant start to produce again for you. I forgot to mention, cut off those faded leaves. So as you see those leaves browning, you of course can remove them down to the neck, and then you'll start to see all of this new growth form for you, okay? That's basically it. That's the way that you can kind of push them into dormancy, get them to kind of rebloom. And again, depending on where your bulb came from, it might bloom within 4 to 6 weeks of you forcing it. It might bloom a little bit later, 6 to 8 weeks. And then you will have bulbs that will kind of bloom into the holidays for you. Another quick tip is if you'd like to have these amaryllis continue to bloom throughout the winter months because you just need some color and you enjoy them so much, that is fine. You can actually plant or pot amaryllis blooms every 2 weeks, and then you have more blossoms as you go throughout the winter. Another real quick thing is amaryllis can be forced in containers that don't have any drainage. You can actually pot them up with potting soil. Just make sure that you've got to be really careful with your watering. If you are planting or planning on planting your amaryllis in a pot that does not have drainage holes, you might want to use a potting soil, so a regular potting mix, but you might want to add some activated charcoal in that. So as the soil is wet, it won't produce a, earthy smell, a little bit of a funky smell. So that'll help kind of reduce any kind of earthy smell that you might get from that pot. You can pot them up with potting soil, or you could put something like pebbles or marble crystals in that pot. Go ahead and fill it up. And I'm going to do that really, really quickly. And then you would fill it up to the top, and you would actually place your amaryllis bulb on top just as a pretty display. You could use this waxed one, or you could use a dried amaryllis bulb to place on top. And then you would basically fill your container up with water right to the base, the root plate of the bulb. And believe me, they will sprout and grow as well. Sometimes these do need support, again, because the flower scape can get heavy, but sometimes they'll stay upright and you can just nestle them down in those pebbles and they can grow from water. They can be wrapped in moss. They can be wrapped in twine, that's kokedama, and they can grow in that respect too, just as long as you keep the moss watered about once a week as well, so keeping that moss moist. And then I also have folks that ask me, can you re-bloom or force these wax-covered amaryllis? And I will say it's difficult, but you can. At the end of the holidays, if you want to make a really quick incision and cut the wax and remove it from the outside. Also, if you can take off this little metal jigamadoo, little metal stand, if you will, you could also plant them, and you can do just like what I had mentioned, where you go ahead and grow it as a house plant until May, end of May, go ahead and grow it as an outdoor annual, bring it in at the end of August, beginning of September, put it into a dormant state, 60, 55 degrees, dark areas, and then go ahead and bring it out in November and start caring for it again. So that's something to consider as well. I think I touched on almost all of the amaryllis. I just wanted to show you really quickly that this is Phyllis the amaryllis. This is Nancy's plant, and we absolutely love her. We actually planted her up 3 years ago now, Taylor. I think she's doing great. She is a houseplant amaryllis, or I should say an office plant amaryllis. She grows year-round indoors with us. She blooms in spring. We'll have to add some pictures when she starts blooming. She's about 3 years old. We potted her up in a video when we were potting up and forcing bulbs, hyacinth, paper whites, and amaryllis for the holidays. And I have to say, she's starting to sink down in her pot. So I think it's time for Phyllis to kind of be raised up a little bit and come up a little bit more in this pot. So we'll do that as well. But she is shedding. And so I wanted to show you really quick how the tunic does kind of fill out and sort of sheds that outer layer too. So those are tunic pieces off of Phyllis. But I think we're going to clean her up and probably bring her up a little bit so she continues to grow in this pot and just enjoys being a houseplant amaryllis. Okay, everybody, enjoy.